Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a new series, one I'm going to title Popular Culture or something like that. And the genesis of this is that for over 20 years, I taught, every spring I taught a course called Popular Culture. And it was just, what a great class. I enjoyed the students so much. We had a lot of fun. Hopefully we learned a lot. And I was talking about one of my friends about the class, and she suggested that I should do this as a lecture series. And since I missed doing the class since I've left the college, I thought, oh, what a great idea. So I sort of created this, what you can do on a lecture series is different from what you can do in the classroom, but I've sort of hopefully been able to create an approximation of the experience in the class. And this will be an exploration of the way popular culture functions in the modern world and shapes and influences how we see the world, how we think about ourselves, how we think about the life around us, and the forces that have changed over time to create that impact. And part of this will involve the listeners, that would be you, doing experiments. So I'm going to give you a whole series of experiments. You can kind of think of yourself as white rats. And I think the more carefully you do the experiments and track these out, the more fulfilling or more insightful you'll find the lecture series to be. Because some of what I'll be talking about is either counterintuitive or hard to get a feel of unless you do a very careful amount of data collection on your own, right? So I can't just tell you about it. You need to do it, reflect on it, and create it for yourself. So that will be sort of different from my other lectures. But basically, what we'll be doing is looking at popular culture, how it's created and formed and distributed, and how those systems shape our understanding of our world and ourselves. And one of the big elements of this that I want to talk about is I'm going to say a lot of, let's do two things. One is start first here, slow down, breathe. You can tell I'm excited. Is nobody probably who's listening to this knows less about popular culture than I do. So it's kind of a hilarious class for this. I rarely watch film, like incredibly rarely. I essentially never watch TV with the notable exception of the NFL. Most of the music I listen to would not fall into the genre of popular culture. And I tend to read long books filled with philosophy or classic novels, which tend to have a very low presence in popular culture. And so, what's going on here? And part of what I liked and what I enjoyed doing with the students is they were very good at filling in the contemporary cultural aspects of this. And I saw my role as sort of filling out the sort of structural, historical, philosophical perspective of how this is developed, how this influences, where it comes from, why it matters. And so this is an important note that you all need to fill in some of the content of which my ignorance is really impressively profound. A second element of this is popular culture does not mean culture that you like. What it means is the culture that is sort of thrust in our faces, whether or not we would like it to be in our faces or not. The kinds of themes or ideas or people or music, that whatever it is that is relentlessly promoted into the culture, either because people really like it or there's a big media campaign behind it, that consistently and continually present itself to us. And this focus will be biased heavily towards the United States because it's the culture of which I'm most familiar with. And so, but I will try to reference other cultures and how this may vary from time to time. But if you do live in the United States, one thing you've probably noticed is if you go into virtually any grocery store, and this is what I mean by popular culture, by the way, is you will see displays of Coke and Pepsi and or Pepsi. And this is not a mistake. Coke and Pepsi make themselves ubiquitously present is their key marketing strategy. And so even if you don't like Coke or Pepsi, you never drink them, you don't care for them, whatever, it doesn't matter, you still know about them. I think this is one of the ways to distinguish popular culture. If you really don't care about something and you're not interested in it and yet somehow you know about it anyway, this is the power of popular culture, to put stuff in your mind, to get your attention onto products or film or stories, even though you don't care about them, even though you have no interest in them. And that's one of the themes that we'll explore, is that this is this huge power of popular culture. And I don't have a real clear definition on what makes something popular per se. But we're talking about major release films, big streaming things, broadcast TV. We'll be definitely talking about online presence now because it's so important how these different platforms are structured and how they impact us and influence us. And that's developed very quickly over the last decade. No, nobody really saw this coming so much. But to begin with, I want to start with sort of a quick business lecture, I guess. This is the business. Now, they call it the attention economy these days, although I think that term is sort of fading at the moment. But I think it's a fair way to evaluate it. And the idea is if I can get your attention, then I can sell you things. If I can sell you things, then I can make a lot of money with ad revenue. That's the short version of that. And so what I want to do is I want to sell things and have lots of viewers or lots of people whose attention I can grab ipso facto, then I can monetize this in some way. And so this boils down to time and money. And so I want to start with the money lecture first, and then we'll move on and we'll look at the time lecture. So first and foremost, let's look at the money part of this. And when we're talking about popular culture, we're talking generally about these very large, sophisticated media companies, of which there are many different varieties, but but generally they're large, concentrated conglomerates. So the new players are things like Netflix and Amazon, who are the streaming services, who have really come onto the scene again in the last decade to become much more prominent. And then you have the more traditional media companies like Disney that we'll talk about that own not one or two outlets, but they own vast number of outlets. They own, CNN, Time Warner, right? Just these endless sequences of distribution channels, media content, studios to produce that content, writers, right? They own everything. They own that vast majority. And estimates run in the United States that somewhere between 80 and 90% of media by viewership, not by production, but by viewership, is produced by 6 companies. And that's probably an exaggeration. It's probably really 4. So think about that. That's unprecedented concentration in both creation and distribution of media content. And one mistake that people tend to make when thinking about this, and this is one of the lessons we want to start with, is that these companies are focused on making profit. And in a way they are, but not in any way that we tend to think of in a too simplistic way. We tend to think of just regular people like, oh, someone has a coffee shop, for instance, just random example, and they sell coffee for a certain amount, and then they make enough from that coffee so they can pay their employees and buy coffee, rent the space, pay for the equipment, and if they're lucky, they have a little money left over every month to pay themselves a salary, and so they've made a profit. Now that is great, and this is a wonderful way. And when people criticize capitalism, I think this is a mistake they make. They go, oh, the capitalism is terrible. Well, that's not so bad. Nothing wrong or unethical going on in this transaction cycle. However, this is not at all what these major media conglomerates are trying to do. Everything about that model for them is wrong. They do not think this way. And so one of the things you have to get in your mind to understand what's going on, and we'll see example after example after example of this as we work through these different media fields, is that their perspectives are very different. What they want to do is not necessarily make a profit. They want to increase their valuation. And how their valuation is calculated changes over time. It's very different from different sectors and for different companies and where they are in their development and what they're trying to do. But just 2 examples is if you look at Amazon's earnings, until about 2017, 3 or 4 years ago, I guess 5 years ago now, Amazon wasn't trying to make a profit at all. They were trying to grow in total scale. And so they just bounced around little net loss, little net gain, little net loss, little net gain. And most of the value that Amazon has achieved, which is huge, whatever $1 trillion over, has been achieved because they've been trying to grow in scale, not so much convert that into huge profit flows. And so the kind of promotions and investments and business strategies that they've pursued are very different than they would have pursued if they were just trying to say, oh, we're going to sell X amount of goods and make X amount of profit. And the idea, which they've sort of been executing in the last couple of years, although they did lose some money a while ago, and then they made a bunch during the pandemic because, hey, that was like sort of made perfect world for Amazon to make money, is to say, oh, maybe we do want to generate a little profit. And so the idea is if you're big enough and you have enough business, anytime you want, hey, you can flip the switch and generate a certain amount of profit. But again, that's not necessarily what they're after. Similarly, with Netflix, their growth in valuation has been attributable primarily to the number of subscribers they have. And of course, the cheaper a service is, likely the more subscribers you'll get. And so the more subscribers you'll get, the more your value grows. So that gives you an incentive to keep subscription rates low, to attract as many subscribers as possible. Now, at some point, that will run out, and Netflix is probably right about there. And then now investors are going, oh, let's convert that at least a little bit. Can we make some profit here? But these companies pursue very different strategies depending on what they're trying to do. And rarely is this a simple equation of, oh, produce a good and sell it for a percentage above what it costs, and yay, everybody's a winner. The goal of these companies, and Disney here is to a phenomenal degree the iconic business. This is the one everybody wants to kind of emulate because they've perfected this in a way that really no other company has, but they're the goal. And so we'll talk about Disney a lot because they've done so well in the American popular culture media, because they've also been pioneers in this and inventors of a lot of it. So we're living in a way in a popular cultural industry shaped by the goals and drives of Disney itself. So again, now they're just this massive media empire. They own everything essentially from ESPN to the Marvel series to Pixar to the Disney, worlds and Disney lands and all of this. And so here's the dream. So you got kind of imagine with me, here's the ideal day for a Disney executive for you to experience. Let's say you're a 10 or 12-year-old kid, and you wake up in the morning and you're wearing, maybe you've got a Donald Duck pillow, or you've got a Spider-Man, pajamas. And so you get up and you go to eat breakfast, and at the breakfast table you have some cold cereal, and on the box is an advertisement for a Pixar film, and maybe you get a little Pixar toy in the cereal box. So that's great. Now you're getting ready for school, so you put your Spider-Man notebook into your Hulk backpack, and you put it on your shoulders, and you go off to school. And at school, you talk to your friends about all kinds of things, but one of them is like that new Pixar movie that's coming up that you just saw on the cereal box, and you got the toy, and so that's totally great. And maybe you swap your Spider-Man notebook for an Iron Man notebook, and so that's very good. And then after school, maybe mom takes you to McDonald's so you can have a little snack, and you get a Happy Meal, and the Happy Meal has maybe a toy from a Marvel movie or some other Disney promotion. That's great. And then you get home in the afternoon and you go on to the Disney website, by the way, which is a thing. They have a special branded website that's quote unquote safe for kids. Or maybe you watch the Disney Channel, of course, that would be great. Or maybe you just do something else like this. And then later that night, the family gets together after dinner and you all stream some Disney movie on the Disney streaming service. Great. Now here's the magic. Now you go to sleep, and when you close your eyes and fall asleep, you dream a Disney dream, right? So all day long, relentlessly, over and over and over again, you've been exposed to Disney product, Disney product, Disney product, Disney product, Disney product. And so now when you fall asleep, it's just totally natural and normal for you to then, I'm going to dream that I'm Spider-Man, or I'm going to dream I'm in a Star Wars universe, or I'm going to dream I'm in Frozen, or whatever it is, that your subconscious is now embraced the Disney's themes, the Disney characters, the Disney stories, the Disney tropes to a point where you dream them. And once you're dreaming the products of a company, well, game, set, and match. That's win, win, and win. There's a reason Star Wars was purchased by Disney for billions and billions of dollars, because it's so inculcated into the mind of a generation. The result of this is not that Disney makes a profit from you selling any of these individual items or selling the streaming service or whatever. No, the result of this is that probably for your life, you will continue to consume, purchase, and participate in Disney products. That means we're not selling you a product or a moment or a movie pass. We're taking your entire life, let's say you're going to live for 75 years, and we're going to be able to get revenue from you for 75 years. This is an incredibly valuable revenue stream because it's not happening once, it's not happening twice, it's going to happen 1,000 times. Now, Disney is so effective at this that the estimates range that probably somewhere between 70 and 80% of the entire population of the United States has been to a Disney theme park. And if ever there was an expensive ripoff in the world, it is a Disney theme park. And yet, of all the places Americans could go in the United States to experience some sort of vacation or experience a museum, go hiking in Yosemite, go sailing in the Pacific Ocean, go fishing in the Atlantic. I mean, it's a big country with lots of opportunities. Grand Canyon exists, it's a thing. Somewhere between 70 and 80% of the entire population, which is hundreds of millions of people, have gone to the themed parks of a single company. How does this happen? It happens because even if you don't care about it, your friends almost certainly do. And even if you grew up and didn't want to go to a theme park and you have kids, they're almost certainly going to want to. And as happened to me, who didn't care about any of this, my parents were never going to take us anywhere, so that was never going to happen. But my school actually took us to a Disney theme park, which, any reason to be out of school, that's good enough. But that a school thought, oh yeah, we can take kids on a field trip, not to a museum, not to an outdoor experience, but to a theme park. And somehow all the parents were like, okay, that's cool. That's a good thing. Just have the school take time out from education to go to just think about it. It's so amazing. It's so powerful. It's so great, right? Like they've convinced society so completely that a school should stop education, stuff a bunch of kids in a bus, and tote them off to a theme park that they have to pay a fortune. Anyway, you see what I'm saying? It's such this incredible achievement. And this is the goal. This is why you see everybody switching to subscription services, right? The goal is not to sell you something once and make a little money. The goal is to inculcate you into a worldview, into a series of experiences, into a series of ideas and behavioral patterns that they can repeat and that can be revenue can be continuously extracted from. Now, to achieve that goal, to achieve the Disney dream, which to eventually inhabit your subconscious so that you can, in fact, dream these things and desire them even beyond your conscious thought. That takes a lot of work, a lot of investment, a lot of care. And so often companies will do crazy things, which we'll talk about this. Seem like, oh, that's a money loser, or that doesn't make sense, or why would they do that? Remember, the goal is not to make a particular amount of money at any particular time. It's to create this sort of outlook, this experiential web that you can't escape from, so that you're continuously exposed to whatever it is I want you exposed to, so that you get inculcated into a cultural outlook. And this is the power of popular culture. And it comes from the increasingly sophisticated and vast scale of these sorts of operations. And so when you think about money and you think about profitability and like, oh, they're all just in this for the cash, On one hand, yes, if you think of it in a very long-term way, but not in cash, but in valuation, because what you want is, valuable products, however those assets are valued on the open market through the stock exchange or private equity markets or whatever. That's where the real value comes from, not necessarily for, oh, they made $1 million, they made $100 million, they made $1 billion this quarter or this year. That's really not the goal. The goal is to say, oh, where are we going to be in a year? Where are we going to be in 5 years? What do these value of these products look like? So just back to Disney again, they've been in a bit of a rough patch. They've been making some apparently catastrophically bad movies, and they haven't been really exploiting some of their great properties like the Star Wars movies, for instance, very well. And they're struggling. However, when you have Marvel and you have Star Wars and you have these other incredibly valuable properties, investors are still going to look at that and go, yeah, if they turn it around, wow, they can really cash those chips again. So, no one's panicking per se. So in pursuit of this, for your first assignment, what I'd like you to do for 1 week is simply track how you're spending your money. Everything that you spend your money on, break it into major categories, just so you know, because it's often we spend money unconsciously. We don't think about it, a little bit here, a little bit there, just so you're aware. I don't care how you spend your money. Obviously, I'm going to not know. If I were in class, these would be an assignment and we would talk about it more directly. But for you, it's just a consciousness raising, an awareness. You may do this. Some people budget very carefully. A lot of people don't. Just so you can see, where is it I'm actually spending my money? Because one of the things these companies are very good at is of using small fees, small purchases, repeat purchases that don't cause a particular amount of pain or a big psychological barrier. And we tend to forget those. By the way, this is the key to gambling, like a slot machine. You lose a little, you lose a little, you lose a little, you lose a little, and then you win a lot. And that big win makes you forget. You're like, oh, I won $50, but you forgot that you put $1 in 55 times to get to that $50 win. So you're negative $5, right? But you feel like, oh, I had this big win. And this seems to be built into our psychology, which makes sense, because if you're, trying to live in the wild, you don't want to remember all the things that didn't matter, because that's no good. You want to go, that's not ripe, that's not ripe, that's not ripe. Oh, this bush is ripe. Food, like big win, remember that. Don't worry about all those trees that you looked at or that didn't work out. It's the one that did. Or if it poisoned you, remember that, right? We want the big delta, the big change in state, not, oh, that's the same, that's the same, that's the same. No use remembering that, because you would just be overwhelmed with uniformity. You need to really focus on those changes. And so, subscription services want to have it small enough so you're like, oh, it's only $4, who cares? Or it's only $10, who cares? Or whatever the service wants to charge you. Or one-time fees, or these sorts of things. Small recurring fees tend not to add up in our minds very quickly. However, over time, of course, these can accumulate, and again, another way of generating vastly more revenue. An example of this is most music streaming services are priced so that you would spend more money streaming music if you subscribe to them than the average person would buying music if they were going to actually buy a digital album, or if anybody does anymore, buy a CD. But because most people would maybe buy 3 CDs in a year, and maybe that would be like $30, but they'll pay $4 a month for a service, and then that's $50. And so that's a net $20 difference. And somehow people are much more comfortable with that, even though the math says you shouldn't be. The experience of spending, well, $10 is a lot more than $3 or $4, but of course it adds up in a different way. So by focusing and knowing what we spend our money on, what we'll see is the patterns that we have, and how that impacts people are very different. So again, this is no judgment. It's just so that you know, and so that when we talk about where popular culture comes from and the forces behind it, what you'll recognize, as we'll discuss, is like, wow, there's a lot of money available, and that drives that. And so in conclusion, on the first lecture, I want to pivot to a larger point that I will return to, because in the course of this series, I'll have a lot of disparaging things to say about companies like Disney, about how a lot of this is structured, how it impacts people, particularly how it impacts children, because essentially they're moderately defenseless against a lot of these predatory practices. However, it is important to remember that popular culture is maybe the greatest thing that's happened in human history. For all of the ills that we'll talk about, and it's easy to criticize, but it's important in a couple of ways. And one is, when we're talking about money, popular culture only exists because over time, and I can draw a line in the sand where this begins, sometime, say 1800, maybe a little later, maybe a little earlier, as the technology revolution, agricultural revolution start to kick in, larger and larger numbers of people started to have increasing amounts of disposable income. That is a miracle. This is spectacular because, again, go back in history, often people, huge part of the population would be peasants, huge part of the population would be slaves or the equivalent of slaves. They were worried about eating. They were worried about having clothes. One of my favorite examples is Kant when he was at the university. Now he's at the university, so he's already upper middle class. He and his roommate had to share pants. And so when one of them was taking their clothes out to get laundered, they would have to share the other guys. They wanted to go out. One of them would have to sit home without pants while the other guy went out with their pants because they didn't have between them 3 pairs of pants. They had 2. One person, 1 pair of pants. That is a long ways from the world of fast fashion. So on one hand, there's been this sort of, I don't know, do you call it democratization? This vast increase in disposable income amongst vast portions of the population. This is unheard of. And you'll often hear, so many people live within $2 a day. And, that is a tragedy. The flip side of that is almost 70% of the world's population now, which is an incredible proportion or more, actually has disposable income. I mean, this is an incredible achievement. And so as this wave of individuals' disposable income has grown, it forced essentially the culture industry to begin to respond in very different ways. One of the first places you see this, and if you're interested in sort of the evolution of this, you can look at London because, of course, center of trade, lots of money coming in, increasing amount of middle-class wealth. You have the stock market starting to generate really wealthy non-aristocrats, right, which was sort of created all kinds of friction and stuff. And so all these debates about taste, and this is late 1600s, early 1700s. This is where you get things like the Tatler and these sorts of popular magazines start to come into being. And authors start to argue about taste because it's like, now we have, taste used to be whatever the court said. Whatever the main aristocrats and the king and the queen or the empress, whatever they said, that was the style. This is what people did. That was how you became an important author. You went to court, you curried favor with the gentry. If they liked you, then you were an important author. If the nobles didn't like you, you weren't an important author. It was just that probably you couldn't be an author because you would starve. So over about a century and a half, this flipped, where all of a sudden there was enough literate people, for instance, if we're talking about writing, lots of other mediums, there were enough literate people who could read, and there was enough publishers, and they had enough money that, slowly this notion of a popular author, an author could write something that enough people liked that he could actually or she could make money from this. And hey presto, the birth of popular culture. And from its inception, there has been this tension, this argument, this debate about, if a lot of people like it, it must be crap. Only the refined few, the aristocrats, of course, originally, but we still have this vestigial idea that only the enlightened, those who are elect of a club of something, whatever that nonsense is, can really appreciate fine things, or real culture versus low culture and high culture, and all this sort of language that I think is just nonsensical and sort of historically bullshit, essentially. Masks this incredible explosion of human expression that is allowed because, wow, lots of people now have a lot of disposable income. The second thing a lot of people have is a lot of disposable time, which we'll be talking about in the very near future, because with income and time, now you have the time to read books, to start taking vacations, to maybe invest in a portrait, right? Lots of great portraiture was done, Golden Age, in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, in the big port cities there. You get all of these portraits done because the merchants had money and they could have the time to sit for the portraits, and they had the artists available who could do this. And so, hey, presto, this cultural explosion. But at the time, these weren't aristocrats. So, ooh, is this D class A? Why are they doing portraits of themselves, right? Only kings are supposed to do that. Now we look back and say, oh no, this is high art. This is the great classics of the golden age of the Dutch, right? And so it's always these waves and movements, but don't forget that it masks this incredible development, which is we have free resources and free time to pursue what we want. And then what we want says something about it, says something about our culture. But I don't think it should be disparaged, and it should not distract us from that notion of wow, what an incredible development. And then finally, the third leg of this stool, which is resources to pursue culture, time to pursue culture, and then the freedom to do this. And as society has become increasingly free, the range of what people have embraced, the activities, the kinds of cultural products that they've decided to consume and or produce, has just gone crazy. It has expanded beyond all expectations. And while we can criticize any particular expression and all of this, the notion that so many people in the world have so much freedom to pursue different kinds of music and different kinds of literature, art, movies, films, vacations, action figures, games, whatever it is that appeals to you from popular culture, that is an extraordinary and historically unique. There's no evidence that, unless you were in very small scale societies where they tended to have a lot more free time, but they really didn't have, like sort of the diversity of resources just because the cultures were incredibly small scale, that to have this mix of time and resources has created this just big swamp of culture that I still think, even though it's been going on maybe now for 100 or 200 years, depending on when you want to score it, at some pretty good scale, we don't have a very good way of thinking about it. We really haven't processed what this means very well. And so for my bigger goal, while understanding the influence and structures of all the different media forms that we encounter is important, on a grander scale is just to take a step back and go, wow, we find ourselves in this incredible place in world history where there are a lot of nexuses? Doesn't sound right. Nexuses? What's the plural of nexus? Look that up. There's so many different loci of cultural production and consumption. It's not unified anymore. And people bemoan this. We'll talk about that. The fragmentation of culture, all blah, is simply an expression of human freedom and human resources and human opportunity. Like, of course there are, because people are diverse, and given that freedom and opportunity to express themselves, we should expect diversity. And so this is why I find in the Disney example so disturbing is that diversity that you would expect is often specifically and purposefully undermined by these major companies, because that's what they can't have. They do not want 1,000 different movies in theaters at one time. They want one movie. They don't want people going to 1,000 different places for vacations. They want them going to one. Now, it's unlikely they're going to achieve that dream, but when 80, 70, 80% of the population of the United States have been to one company's theme parks in their lifetimes, that's not random. That's not a mistake. It's not because the parks are just so wonderful everybody wants to go to them. This is a systematic interaction with this seething pool of possibility that we encounter in modern popular culture. So again, lots of criticism to come, lots of irritations and sort of preposterous and unbelievable approaches that these companies take, and how people respond to them is amazing. But I do not want to lose sight of, because I do at times, by the way, I really do, that it's all growing out of this unbelievably wonderful advent, which is the material wealth, time wealth, and the wealth of freedom to express, explore, and discover that has never existed before. So keep that in mind as we go forward and begin your first homework assignment, which is like, how much money do I spend and where do I spend it? And think about this in major categories. And I want you to break it down this way. One, just total for the week. What would that mean for a month? What would that mean for a year? And then break it down by categories, like food and maybe entertainment or rent, if you will, things. And then try to come up with a number and say, if I really look at my budget, what is the money that I have to spend? We all need food. We all need a place to live, right? These sorts of things. These are necessary. And you can, of course, these are soft categories. So just, feel free, try to be a little rigorous in your own mind, come up with your own parameters, and then come up with how much of this money am I spending discretionarily? I don't have to spend it on this. So maybe if my food budget is, $100 in a week, could I spend 75 and still be fine and, not starve myself or anything? Probably yes. If so, then $25 of that budget would be discretionary. And then come up with an amount of your discretionary income, like how much money could you spend in other ways if you really wanted to, for a week, for a month, and for a year. And if you get that number and then multiply it times, the population of the developed world, which will be a couple of billion people, you'll get a sense of just how much potential money there is out there, to put a fine word on it, floating around that people could spend otherwise. And to begin the next lecture, once you've done this little bit of research on your own, then you'll begin to see wow, there is this just huge sea of potential money that companies are going after because it's there. If it wasn't there, this whole system would fall apart. But it is there, and it's sort of astounding. So, popular culture, part one, a little bit about business, a little bit about the historical perspective. Next time we'll look at the money, and then we'll start looking at time. Thank you very much.